Chapter 6. Sand Blasted. In the distance, a haze of sand was spreading over the desert. As the wind picked up, the sky turned red and the haze thickened into a brown cloud. The cloud began gliding toward Jack, Annie, and Mamoon like a moving wall. "Get down! Lie on your bellies," ordered Mamoon. "Quickly, cover your faces with your headcloths." Jack clucked his tongue. Beauty knelt to the ground. Jack, Annie, and Mamoon jumped off their camels and lay down on the sand beside them. Jack tried desperately to cover his face with his headcloth, but the raging wind kept whipping the cloth from his hands. The sky turned from red to black. The moaning sound turned into a loud rumbling. Jack looked up and saw the wind rip the saddlebag off Mamoon's kneeling camel. The bag hit the ground and fell open. The box bounced out and tumbled away in the driving wind. "The treasure!" cried Jack, but his voice was drowned out by the wind. He jumped up and bolted after the box. Jack raced across the desert as the sand battered his body. The wind tried to push him down, but Jack ran with all his might until finally he caught up with the box and threw himself down on top of it. He grabbed the ends of his headscarf and covered his face. The sandstorm blasted over Jack, sounding like the hoofbeats of 100 galloping camels. Jack's eyes burned. He felt as if he were suffocating. Slowly the thundering softened to a low rumbling. The rumbling faded to a moaning. The wind died down. The hot desert grew still and silent. Coughing, Jack rolled over and sat up. He had sand in his mouth, sand in his ears, and sand in his nose. He pulled off his glasses and rubbed his stinging eyes, but the rubbing only made them worse. Blinking, Jack clutched the box and looked around for the others. The air was thick with dust. He had completely lost his sense of direction. "Jack! Jack!" he heard Annie shouting. Jack clutched the small wooden box and stood up. His legs were so wobbly he fell over. "Annie!" he croaked. "Jack!" she called through the dust. "Where are you?" "Here," he said. "Where?" "Here." "There you are," said Annie, stumbling out of the haze. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," croaked Jack. "Are you?" "Yes, I ran after you," said Annie. Her voice was hoarse, too. "I had to save the box," said Jack. "Where's Mamoon?" "I don't know," said Annie. "I don't think he saw us chase after the box." "Mamoon!" they shouted together. "Mamoon!" There was no answer. Peering through the sandy haze, Jack heard thumping sounds. He and Annie turned around. Their 2 camels were trotting toward them. "Cutie!" cried Annie. "Beauty!" Jack and Annie stumbled to their camels and grabbed their reins. "Thank you for finding us," said Annie. "Yeah, thanks," said Jack, patting Beauty. "Mamoon!" Annie called. "Mamoon!" "He must have gone in the wrong direction to look for us," said Jack. "If we don't find him, how will we get to Baghdad? And what will we do with this treasure?" asked Annie. "I don't know," said Jack. He held up the wooden box. "Look, the top's broken," said Annie. She pointed to a long crack running down the lid of the box. "I hope the treasure wasn't hurt," said Jack. "Maybe we should check and see," said Annie. Jack took a deep breath. He still thought Mamoon might not want them to look inside the box, but his curiosity got the best of him. "Okay," he said. "I guess it wouldn't hurt to make sure it's all right." Jack pried apart the 2 pieces of wood and lifted them off. Inside the box was a book. "A book?" said Jack, surprised. He'd expected gold or jewels. He carefully lifted the book out of the box. It had a plain leather cover with no title on it. "It doesn't look like a precious treasure," said Annie. "Maybe the writing inside it is the treasure," said Jack. Jack gently opened the book. Inside were pages of thick yellow paper. The pages were bound with stitching and covered with writing on both sides. The first page said, "The writing of Aristotle." "Who is Aristotle?" said Annie, sounding out the name. "I don't know," said Jack. "I'll look him up in our research book." He unhooked his bag from the saddle horn. Sand covered the books inside. He pulled out their research book and brushed it off. Then he looked up Aristotle in the index. "Good, he's here," Jack said. He turned to the right page and read, "Aristotle lived in ancient Greece over 2,300 years ago. He is known as one of the greatest philosophers of all time. The word philosopher means lover of wisdom. Aristotle's words were introduced to the Western world by the Arabs in the Middle Ages. So Aristotle was a great lover of wisdom, said Annie. I guess so, said Jack, but I wonder why this book is such a treasure. Wait a minute, said Annie. Doesn't Merlin's note tell us that we have to help the Caliph of Baghdad spread wisdom to the world? Jack caught his breath. Yeah, he said, and if this is a book of Aristotle's writings, it must be full of wisdom. We have to get this book to the Caliph. That's our mission for Merlin. We'd better get going, said Annie. Jack and Danny pulled out the reins of their camels and clucked their tongues. Beauty and Cutie knelt to the sand, and Jack and Danny climbed on. Leaving the broken box behind, Jack carefully packed the ancient book of Aristotle's wisdom and the research book into his bag. Then he hung the bag from his saddle horn. Which way? Said Annie. Toward the rising sun in the east, said Jack. That's what Mamoon said. It's that way then, said Annie. She pointed toward a bright blue in the hazy sky. Jack and Danny's camels headed into the dusty, glaring sun. Hey, we're following Merlin's second instruction now, said Annie. Right through the dust and hot morning light. You're right, said Jack. As Jack and Danny kept traveling toward the east, the desert sands shimmered and sparkled with heat. The air cleared, but still they saw no sign of Mamoon. Jack looked down to shield his eyes from the burning sunlight. Exhausted, he closed his eyes. As Beauty swayed gently from side to side, Jack's head dropped forward. Suddenly he heard Annie shout, Jack, look! What, Mamoon? Said Jack, jerking awake. No, look, said Annie. In the distance, Jack saw sunlit towers and domes shining against the clear blue sky. Oh, man, he whispered. Baghdad. Chapter 7. Behind the Third Wall. Let's hurry, said Annie. As Beauty and Cutie walked toward Baghdad, the loose sand of the desert changed to sun-baked earth. Then the hard earth changed to scrubby grass. Goats and sheep grazed in the grass, and farmers dotted the countryside. It wasn't long before Jack and Danny came to a red clay path. The path led to a crossroads where many travelers were coming from different directions. They were all heading toward the shining city. Jack and Danny rode alongside boys driving sheep and farmers in donkey carts. They passed women with veils over their faces, carrying pots on their shoulders. Jack kept looking for Mamoon, but he never saw him. Moving with the crowd, Beauty and Cutie climbed across a bridge. Rowboats and barges glided across the yellowish-brown river. On the other side of the river was a huge outdoor market with a maze of tents. The market seemed to be filled with people from many countries. The sharp smell of incense filled the air. Stalls were jammed with burlap sacks, baskets, and carpets. Shoemakers sat cross-legged, stitching shoes. Potters were bent over ovens, baking earth-colored pots. Weavers sat at small looms, spinning silk brocade. Paper, pearls? A merchant shouted. No thanks, said Annie. Pigeons, parrots? Another shouted at Jack. No thanks, he said. I love this place, said Annie. What is it? I'll look it up, said Jack. He pulled out their research book and read. In the 9th century, traders from all over the world brought their goods to Baghdad to sell. Baghdad merchants traded paper, fine cloth, and jewelry for goods from Spain, India, Africa, China, Greece, and other lands. These goods were sold in a huge open-air market called a bazaar. Oh, so a bazaar is sort of like a mall, said Jack. It's a lot better than a mall, said Annie. Let's get off and look around. We don't have time to shop, said Jack. We have to finish our mission. He pulled out Merlin's letter and read, Find a horse on a dome, the one who sees all, in the heart of the city, behind the third wall. It sounds like we pass 3 walls and then we come to a horse, said Jack. We'd better keep going. Jack put the book and letter away. Beauty and Cutie ambled through the noisy bazaar. When they left the bazaar, they came to a carved brick wall. Running along the base of the wall was a muddy moat. Look, that must be the first wall, said Annie. Cool, said Jack. Jack and Danny rode the 2 camels over an arched bridge that crossed the moat. They passed through a gate with double iron doors. On the other side of the wall was a busy avenue lined with buildings. As their camels moved slowly in and out of the crowd, Jack pulled out their research book. Swaying from side to side, he read to Annie. During its golden age, Baghdad had good hospitals. The city was known for its excellent police system and public schools, along with its many libraries and stores and a zoo with 100 lions. "I'd like to visit those lions," said Annie. "We don't have time now," said Jack. Their camels clopped down the busy avenue until they came to a green field. "Look, there's the second wall," said Annie. Bordering the field was another wall. It was curved too, but much taller than the first. It looked like it was at least 100 feet high. There were guards at the gate, but they didn't seem to be checking any of the people passing through. "Act normal," Jack advised Annie. "Don't attract their attention." Jack and Annie joined a stream of people passing through the gate. Beyond the second wall was another grand avenue. At the end of the wide cobbled road was another green field. "Look, the third wall," said Annie. The third wall was even taller than the second. Again, people were passing freely through its gate. "This part of the mission is easy," said Annie. "Yeah," said Jack, "but we still have to find that horse on the dome and then find the Caliph and get him to meet with us." Beauty and Cutie ambled through the gate of the third wall, carrying Jack and Annie into the heart of Baghdad. A palace loomed before them. Its roof was a glittering green dome. At the top of the dome stood the statue of a horse. "Yay, the horse who sees all," said Annie. "I'll bet the Caliph lives in that palace. Let's follow those people inside." She pointed to a stream of people entering an arched passageway outside the palace. Jack and Annie rode under the arch and into a beautiful garden. The warm breeze smelled the flowers. They rode down a path bordered by date palms until they came to a courtyard where boys were playing ball. Near the courtyard was a stable with camels in it. "Looks like we'll have to go the rest of the way on foot," said Jack. "Yeah, I guess Beauty and Cutie can stay there," said Annie, pointing to the stable. Jack and Annie rode into the stable. They clucked, and the camels knelt. As Jack reached for his shoulder bag, a ball rolled into the stable. Annie picked it up and stepped outside. Jack followed her. "Here!" shouted a young boy with curly black hair. He was holding out his hands. Annie threw the ball to him, and the boy caught it. He grinned at Annie's good throw. "Who are you?" he called. "Where are you from?" Before Jack could say anything, Annie crossed to the boys. Jack hurried after her. "I'm Annie, and this is my brother Jack," Annie said. "We're from Frog Creek, Pennsylvania." "Why have you come to Baghdad?" the boy asked. "We have to see the Caliph," said Annie. The boy and his friends laughed. "What's so funny?" said Annie. "Our Caliph is the most powerful man in the world," said another boy. "He does not have time to visit with children." "That's what everyone keeps saying," said Annie. "But we're here on a very important mission. Annie," Jack interrupted. "Come on, I left my bag back in the stable." He waved to the boys. "See you guys later. Let's go, Annie." Annie started to leave with Jack. "When you discover that the Caliph will not meet with you, come back and play with us," called the curly-haired boy. Annie stopped. "Don't worry," she called back. "He'll meet with us. We're special." "Annie, come on," said Jack. "Why are you special?" shouted the boy. "For one thing, we just saved a precious treasure from bandits and from a sandstorm in the desert," said Annie. "For another, Annie," Jack said sternly. He grabbed her arm. "Come on." He pulled Annie away. As they headed back into the stable, Jack shook his head. "Don't say stuff like that," he said. "Why not?" said Annie. "Because it's bragging," said Jack. "It makes other kids feel bad. Even if you are special, you don't have to—" "Oh, no!" cried Annie. She covered her mouth with her hands. "What?" said Jack, following her shocked gaze. Jack's leather bag lay at Beauty's feet. It was open. Beside it was the torn leather cover of Aristotle's book. Wet pages hung in shreds from Beauty's mouth as she happily chewed the precious treasure. Chapter 8. Room of the Tree. No! cried Jack. Jack ran to Beauty and yanked hunks of paper from her mouth. Annie dropped to her knees and picked up the torn pieces strewn around the camel's big feet. The treasure's ruined, moaned Annie. Jack was stunned. I shouldn't have left my bag here, he said. No, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have gone back and bragged to those kids, wailed Annie. I should have acted more humble, like Merlin said. Annie sounded like she was about to cry. It's okay, said Jack, but he knew it wasn't. The book was destroyed. They failed in their mission. Maybe we can fix it, said Annie. Jack shook his head. No, we can't, he said. It's completely destroyed. It can't be fixed. Annie looked up. What did you just say? She said. I said it can't be fixed, said Jack. A big grin crossed Annie's face. Right, it can't be fixed, she said. Help me gather up all these pieces. Why? Said Jack. Had Annie gone nuts? Just do it, quick, said Annie. Jack and Annie rushed around the stable, gathering up all the torn pages. Now pile everything over here on top of the cover and give me the book, said Annie. What book? Said Jack. The rhyme book, said Annie. Oh, said Jack. Right. He reached into his shoulder bag and pulled out Teddy and Kathleen's book of magic rhymes. Jack opened the book and read down the list. Here it is. Mend what cannot be mended, he said. That's the one, said Annie. Jack flipped through the pages until he came to the rhyme. He held up the book so he and Annie could both see. Standing in a shaft of sunlight, Jack read in a loud, clear voice. Heal what is broken beyond repair. Annie read the second line. Ave brie all fan a mare. The paper bits fluttered. They began to swirl off the floor. They swirled up and around as if they were caught in a small tornado. The tornado captured all the torn pieces in its funnel and twisted them together. The paper swirled into a blur of blinding light. Jack shielded his eyes. He heard a loud whoof. When he looked up, the bright tornado had vanished. Lying on the floor of the stable in front of Jack and Annie was the ancient book. Holding his breath, Jack carefully picked up the treasure. He opened the leather cover. Oh, man, he whispered. Aristotle's priceless words of wisdom were neatly written on the yellow pages. There was no sign of a rip or tear anywhere. Thank goodness, breathed Annie. Yeah, said Jack. So what do we do now? said Annie. I don't know, said Jack. What's the next thing Merlin tells us to do? He pulled out Merlin's letter and read, Beneath birds who sing in the room of the tree, greet a friend you once knew and a new friend to be. What's that mean? said Jack. Suddenly Jack heard someone behind them. He and Annie turned around. A girl was standing in the doorway of the stable. She wore a long white gown. Her hair and face were hidden by a veil. Hi, said Annie. Who are you? I am a servant of the palace, the girl whispered. Come. She motioned for them to follow her. Let's go, Annie said to Jack. Where is she taking us? asked Jack. And why is she whispering? I don't know, said Annie, but I feel like we should follow her. Okay, said Jack. He put the book of wisdom and the book of magic rhymes into his bag. He slung the bag over his shoulder and followed Annie and the servant girl out of the stable. The three of them walked through the courtyard and through the palace doors. They walked down a wide candlelit hallway over a thick woven carpet. At the end of the hallway was a tall carved door. A boy servant stood by the door. He wore baggy trousers and a long shirt. His face was almost completely hidden by his headcloth. He did not speak or look at them. The servant girl stood close to Jack and Annie. In her strange whispery voice, she said, In front of the chair, bow to the floor. Do not look up, and do not speak until you are spoken to. But what? said Jack. Go quickly, whispered the girl. The boy servant pulled open the heavy door. The girl servant pushed them into the room. Wait, said Jack. But the boy servant closed the door behind them, leaving Jack and Annie alone. Jack, look, we're here, said Annie. The room of the tree. Jack turned around. A giant tree stood in the center of the room. It had silver leaves that fluttered as if blown by the wind. Mechanical golden birds sang tweet, tweet from the silver branches. Beneath the strange tree was an empty black chair. Jewels sparkled in its shiny wood. We're in the right place, said Annie. She quoted from Merlin's letter. Beneath birds who sing in the room of the tree, greet a friend you once knew and a new friend to be. Another mystery solved, Annie said. Not really, said Jack. Where are the two friends? I don't know, but we better bow in front of the chair like that servant girl told us to, said Annie. Jack and Annie knelt in front of the shiny black chair. They bowed their heads to the floor. Jack gripped his bag with the treasure inside. Remember what else she said, Annie reminded Jack. Don't look up, and don't speak until we're spoken to. But there's no one here, said Jack. He felt foolish, bowing in front of a chair and listening to the chirping of mechanical birds. Why are we doing this? He wondered. The door opened with a low creaking sound. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. He heard footsteps moving past them. How did you get into the throne room? A deep, gruff voice asked. A servant brought us here, said Annie. And why have you come? Asked the voice. We have a priceless treasure to give to the Caliph of Baghdad, said Jack, keeping his head down. It's a book of wisdom. Jack fumbled in his bag and pulled out the book. He kept his eyes tightly shut as he held the book up toward the voice. There was a long silence. We hope it will help the Caliph spread wisdom to the world, said Annie. How did you come to be in possession of this book? The man asked. We were helping a friend, said Annie, and we got separated in the sandstorm. Ah, then I suppose you brought this book to Baghdad to gain a reward, said the man. No, we didn't, said Jack. It was our mission to give it to the Caliph. Surely you must be seeking some payment in exchange for this treasure, said the man. Would you not like precious perfumes gathered from the sweetest flowers on earth? No, thank you, said Annie. Rubies as large as hen's eggs, said the man. No, thanks, said Jack. You would not accept the book's weight in gold, said the man. We don't need a reward, really, said Jack. Since he likes books so much, why don't you just tell the Caliph to use his gold and rubies to buy more of them, said Annie. Again there was a silence. Then the man cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was gentle and familiar sounding. Look up at me, Jack and Annie, he said. Jack opened his eyes. He slowly lifted his head. First, he saw gleaming gold slippers, then a long white robe with gold trim, then a familiar face. Jack gasped. He couldn't believe his eyes. The man wasn't a scary person at all. The man was Mamoon. Chapter 9. House of Wisdom. Mamoon? Said Annie. Yes, said Mamoon. I am very glad to see that you have safely arrived in Baghdad. We're glad you're safe too, said Annie. We were worried about you. I looked everywhere for you after the sandstorm, said Mamoon. Finally, I gave up my search and returned sadly to Baghdad. I assume you found your family? Sure, said Annie. We found them. And we found your book, said Jack. When we couldn't find you, we decided that we should give the book to the Caliph. Mamoon smiled. You still do not understand, do you? He said. Understand what? Said Annie. I am Caliph Abdullah al-Mamoon. You're the Caliph? Said Annie. But how? What? Stammered Jack. For many years, I have wanted a book of Aristotle's wisdom, explained the Caliph. I heard that such a book had been found in the city of Damascus, and I made arrangements to acquire it for my library. It was the most important that it arrived here safely. I have long wished to travel again through the desert as I did when I was a boy. So I disguised myself as a humble merchant and made the journey. My fellow travelers never knew my true identity." "Wow," whispered Jack. "You have shown me that you have a great respect for books and learning," said Caliph al-Mamoon. "And you have also proven you have humble hearts. Before you join your family, I want to show you a very special place. I call it the House of Wisdom." "The House of Wisdom?" breathed Jack. "That sounds great." "It is my hope that the world will indeed find it great," said the Caliph. "Come." He started to leave the room. Jack and Danny rose from the floor and hurried after him. Carrying the ancient book of Aristotle, the Caliph led Jack and Danny out of the room of the tree. His gold-trimmed robe billowed about him as he swept down the corridor. Every person he passed bowed low to the floor. "Another mystery solved," Annie said to Jack. She quoted from Merlin's letter. "Greet a friend you once knew and a new friend to be." "Both friends are the same person," said Annie. "Mamoon from the desert and Caliph Abdullah al-Mamoon." "Right," said Jack, smiling. The Caliph led Jack and Danny out the front doors of the palace. In the courtyard stood two camels with long poles attached to their saddles. Resting on top of the poles was a small carriage decorated with gold tassels and brass bells. Servants helped Jack, Annie, and Caliph Abdullah al-Mamoon into the strange little carriage. Bells jingled as the camels began to move slowly through the courtyard. The Caliph opened tiny shutters to let in air and sunlight. Jack looked out. Everyone bowed as the royal carriage passed by, the boys playing ball, the gardeners weeding flower beds, the women carrying pots. Jack had lots of questions about the House of Wisdom, but now that he knew their friend Mamoon was the mighty Caliph, he felt shy. Even Annie seemed to be at a loss for words as they rode past the date palms and the palace gardens. "We are here," said the Caliph as the camels came to a stop. He helped Jack and Danny out of the carriage. Then he led them up the steps of a large brick building. "Welcome to the House of Wisdom," said the Caliph, "a learning center for the entire world." "What happens here?" asked Jack. "Come, I will show you." The Caliph escorted Jack and Danny through the front door and down a wide hallway. "We have a laboratory for discovering new medicines," he said, "and an observatory for viewing the stars and planets. But this is my favorite room of all." The Caliph stood before an arched doorway. He opened the door and led Jack and Danny into a huge, silent room. "This is the library," he said in a hushed voice. "Even I must be very quiet here." Late afternoon light slanted down from high open windows, streaming over bookshelves and colorful carpets. Men read at long tables. When the readers looked up and saw the Caliph, they all started to rise. "Please continue with your work. Do not mind us," the Caliph said softly. The men sat down again and returned to their reading and writing. The Caliph pointed to a bearded man sitting by a window, hunched over a pile of papers. The man was writing furiously. "That is all queers me," whispered the Caliph. "He is a truly great mathematician. He has perfected the Indian way of writing numbers." The Caliph pointed to numbers written on a board on the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. "We call these Arabic numerals," he said. "Arabic numerals?" said Jack. "Yes," said the Caliph. Jack whispered to Annie, "We use Arabic numerals too. They must have come from that guy." The Caliph pointed to another man reading by the window. "He is Kinsey. He is perhaps the most brilliant scientist and thinker in the world," whispered the Caliph. "But he is very humble. He believes knowledge cannot belong to only one person or country. It belongs to all. The world grows wise only when wisdom is shared." "I agree, and that is why I built this house." "I agree too," whispered Annie. "Me too," said Jack. "Scientists and scholars from many countries come here to read and study and share their knowledge, whispered the Caliph. We have thousands of books. They have all been copied by hand. By hand? Said Annie. That's a lot of writing. What kind of books? Asked Jack. Books of history, mathematics, geography, and medicine, said the Caliph. But we also have a very special book of fantasy and wonder. The Caliph took a large, thick book down from a shelf. He rested it on a table and turned the pages to show Jack and Annie. The book was filled with fancy writing and beautiful illustrations. There were pictures of Aladdin and Ali Baba, magic lamps and flying carpets. Oh, tales from the Arabian Nights, said Annie. We know those stories. You do? Wonderful, the Caliph said with a smile. It seems someone from our land has traveled to yours and shared our stories. Perhaps someone will soon bring stories from your land back to us. That is the great power of a book, no? Yes, said Annie. And I hope your land will hear of this book too someday, said the Caliph. He held out the book of Aristotle's writings. After I have read it, I will have it copied, so I can share its wisdom with the world. Thank you for helping me. Sure, Jack said modestly. That was our mission. I fear I must now return to my duties, said the Caliph. But please, stay in the library. Read until you must go to meet your family, and come back someday to visit me. We'll try, said Jack. Goodbye, Annie. Goodbye, Jack. Goodbye, Mamoon, Annie said. The mighty Caliph gave them a warm smile and a deep bow. Then he left Jack and Annie in his wondrous library. Chapter 10. Before the Moon Rises. Jack and Annie looked around the big room. The scholars and scientists were all deep into their reading. I can't believe Mamoon is the Caliph, whispered Jack. Remember that life is full of surprises, Annie repeated from Merlin's letter. Yeah, and return to the treehouse before the moon rises, Jack finished. I almost forgot that part, said Annie. Me too, said Jack. Shh, said one of the scholars and scientists. Sorry, said Annie. Jack and Annie looked up at the open window. The sky was pink. The sun would be setting soon. We have to get back to the treehouse, Annie whispered, before the moon rises. I know, said Jack. But how? He felt a moment of panic. The treehouse is really far away, he thought. If we traveled on Beauty and Cutie, it would take a whole day and night to get there. And what about sandstorms and bandits? Jack looked at Annie. She was smiling. Magic, she mouthed. Jack caught his breath and nodded. They both looked around to see if any of the scholars or scientists were watching. They weren't. Jack quietly slipped Teddy and Kathleen's book out of his bag. He and Annie turned their backs to the others and opened the book to the table of contents. Annie pointed to turn into ducks. Jack gave her a look. Annie pointed to fly through the air. Yes, said Jack. Shh, said a scholar. Jack turned to the right page. He held up the book so they both could see. Jack said the first line of the rhyme. Sail through the sky where you wish to go. Annie said the second. Son e4, son e row. You must be quiet, or you will have to leave the library, one of the scholars said grouchily. Don't worry, we're going, said Annie. A wind blew through the tall open window, fluttering the pages of the Arabian Nights book. The scholars and scientists grabbed their papers before they blew away. The wind picked up a corner of the small carpet Jack and Annie were standing on. The carpet rippled. Jack and Annie fell forward. As they tried to stand, the carpet lifted off the floor. Oh, cried all the scholars and scientists. The carpet began floating up. It rose above the long tables. It rose above the shelves of books. Everyone jumped out of their chairs and scrambled out of the way, shouting, Help! Move! Watch out! Impossible! What is happening? Bye! called Annie. The carpet floated to the tall open window and glided out of the House of Wisdom. Chilly air blew against Jack and Annie. Their headcloths flapped wildly as they clung to the end of the carpet and sailed through the sky. "This is great!" cried Jack. "Really great!" shouted Annie. The carpet soared over the House of Wisdom, over the Caliph riding back to his palace in his carriage, and over the camel stable. The carpet zipped over the green dome with a horse on top. It flew over the courtyard, where the boys were still playing ball, over the third wall, and past the green field and the grand avenue. The carpet flew over the second wall, the houses, the hospitals, and the 100 lions in the zoo. It flew over the first wall, the arched bridge, and the moat. The carpet zoomed over the bazaar with a maze of stalls, the shoemakers, potters, and weavers. It sailed high over the road to Baghdad. Below, Jack and Danny saw men driving donkey carts, the boys leading sheep, and the women carrying pots. The carpet flew faster and faster and faster, over the river, the grazing fields, and the dunes with the whistling sands, over the red glowing desert, toward the setting sun and the small oasis, in the middle of nowhere. The magic carpet slid smoothly onto the scrubby grass, near the small spring and the thorny shrubs, near the date palms and the rope ladder. The desert looked as if it were on fire with golden red light. Jack felt giddy. That was so fast," he said. "I can't believe we made it all the way here." "No kidding," said Annie. "The magic must have helped us stay on." She and Jack tried to stand. They teetered and fell against each other. "Steady," said Annie, giggling. "You okay?" "Perfect," said Jack. He put his back over his shoulder and staggered off the carpet. Then he and Annie headed over to the tallest day palm. Jack pulled the rope ladder from behind the trunk, and they climbed up. When they got inside the treehouse, Jack took out Merlin's letter. He glanced out the window one last time. The sun was gone. The carpet looked small and ordinary in the shadows beneath the palm tree. The desert looked vast and silent and lonely. A thin crescent moon had appeared in the sky. "Return to the treehouse before the moon rises," said Jack. "That was our last instruction from Merlin," said Annie. "We're all done." Jack looked down at Merlin's letter. He pointed at the words Jack and Annie of Frog Creek. "I wish we could go home," he said. The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. The Frog Creek woods were chilly in the afternoon air. Jack and Danny were dressed in their jeans and jackets again. Jack's shoulder bag was a backpack. "Good trip," Jack said simply. Annie nodded. "Really cool," she said. "I guess we should get home," said Jack. "I have lots of homework to finish." "Leave the research book, but don't forget to take Teddy and Kathleen's rhyme book for safekeeping," said Annie. Jack reached into his backpack. He pulled out the book on the golden age of Baghdad and placed it on the treehouse floor. Then he threw his backpack over his shoulder and climbed down the ladder. Annie followed. Together they walked through the early spring woods. "We passed Merlin's second test," said Annie. "We helped spread wisdom to the world. That's a pretty big deal." "Be humble," Jack reminded her. "Well, I guess Teddy and Kathleen's book did the hard stuff for us," Annie said humbly. "I missed them," said Jack. "Me too," said Annie. "But I think they might have been with us in Baghdad." "What do you mean?" said Jack. "Remember that servant girl and the boy who took us to the Caliph?" said Annie. "They sort of came out of nowhere, and we never actually saw their faces, did we?" "No," said Jack. "You think?" Annie shrugged. "Maybe." Jack smiled and took a deep breath. "Maybe," he said softly. 2 missions and 5 rhymes left," said Annie. "I hope Merlin sends for us again soon." "But not too soon," said Jack. "I need to do my homework first." Annie laughed. "Math with Arabic numerals?" she said. Right, said Jack. And maybe tomorrow we'll go to the library and see if they have any books of Aristotle's wisdom. Good idea, said Annie. A cool spring breeze rustled the trees, and Jack and Annie hurried toward home.